Chapter 4. Ghosts and Vengeance. Kit spent the next 3 days watching Victor Strand's warehouses. She'd been gathering information on him for years, small pieces carefully collected: where he lived, where he worked, who he paid, who feared him. The shape of his empire had emerged slowly, like a figure materializing from fog. He ran smuggling operations out of 3 warehouses along the Thames, near the West India docks. Opium, mostly, though Kit had heard whispers of other cargo: stolen goods, contraband tobacco, things that came in on ships flying legitimate flags and disappeared into London's underworld before customs could ask questions. It was a good operation. Clean, organized, protected by bribed officials, and the kind of violence that kept people from asking questions. The kind of operation that could destroy anyone who threatened it. Kit crouched on a rooftop across from Strand's main warehouse, watching men load crates onto carts in the courtyard below. The wind off the river was cold and damp, carrying the smell of sewage and rot. She'd been here since before dawn, her body stiff from hours of stillness. But she didn't move. Patience was a skill she'd learned the hard way. One of the carts pulled away, heading north toward the city. Kit memorized the driver's face, the route he took. Information. Always gather information. Know the patterns, know the weak points, know where to strike when the time came. The time was coming soon. She could feel it. A man emerged from the warehouse, tall, well-dressed in a way that was expensive without being flashy. Dark hair going grey at the temples, strong features that might have been handsome if they weren't so cold. Victor Strand. Kit's hand went to the knife in her pocket, fingers curling around the handle. She was too far away for a throw, too exposed for a direct attack. But the impulse was there, hot and immediate. 8 years of rage condensed into the simple desire to cross the street and bury the blade in his throat. She forced her hand to relax. Not yet. Not like this. Strand spoke to one of his lieutenants, gesturing at the remaining crates. He looked prosperous, confident. A man who'd built something and was proud of it. A man who slept soundly at night. Kit wondered if he even remembered her father's name. 8 years ago. Kit was 15. The kitchen in their rooms was small. 1 table, 2 chairs, a stove that barely worked. Kit sat at the table, mending a dress by candlelight, while her mother prepared a thin soup from bones and vegetables that were mostly rot. Her father hadn't come home yet, which wasn't unusual. The docks ran late sometimes. He should be here by now, her mother said, more to herself than Kit. Sarah Thorne was a thin woman, worn down by years of hard work, but there was still softness in her face when she looked at Kit. It's past dark. He's fine, Mum. Probably stopped at the pub. Kit bit off the thread, examining her stitches. Crooked, but they'd hold. You know how he is when the lads want to celebrate a good haul. Her mother didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. She never argued with Kit's father about anything, even when he spent money they couldn't spare on drink. Kit went back to her mending, only half listening as her mother fretted. She was thinking about the apprenticeship at the dressmaker's shop. If she could save enough, maybe Mrs. Fletcher would take her on properly. It would mean real wages, a trade, a future that didn't involve scrubbing other people's floors. The knock at the door came at 9 o'clock. Kit's mother froze, ladle halfway to the pot. They looked at each other. No one knocked at 9 o'clock unless something was wrong. Kit got up first, opening the door to find 2 men she didn't recognize. Dock workers, from their clothes. Their faces were grim. "Mrs. Thorne?" one of them said. Kit's mother appeared beside her, hands twisting in her apron. "Yes?" "It's about your husband, Ma'am. There's been an accident." Present-day Kit shifted on the rooftop, her eyes never leaving Strand. He'd moved into the warehouse now, out of sight. She should go, come back tomorrow, continue the careful observation that had become routine. But she stayed, watching the warehouse like it might reveal something new, some weakness she'd missed. Her father's death had been ruled an accident. A cargo net had failed, they said. The rigging had been old, poorly maintained. James Thorne had been in the wrong place at the wrong time when it snapped, and a ton of cargo had crushed him against the dock. Tragic, unfortunate. No one's fault, really. The lie had been perfect. They let her see his body. Kit wished they hadn't. He didn't look like himself anymore. Too broken. Too still. Her mother had screamed when she saw him, a sound Kit had never heard before and would never forget. The kind of scream that came from somewhere deep and primal. The sound of a heart breaking audibly. Kit didn't scream. She just stood there, looking at her father's crushed chest, his twisted limbs, and felt something inside her go very cold and very quiet. It was an accident, the foreman told them. He had kind eyes, which somehow made it worse. The rigging failed. Nothing could have been done. My husband checked that rigging every morning, Kit's mother said, her voice hollow. He was careful. He was always so careful. Accidents happen, Mrs. Thorne. I'm very sorry for your loss. They gave her mother £2 in compensation. £2 for a man's life, for a family's future, for everything they'd ever had or hoped to have. The funeral was 3 days later. Kit counted 11 people in attendance, not including the priest. Her father's friends from the docks came, mumbled condolences, left quickly. They all had that same look. Guilty, frightened, relieved it hadn't been them. No one mentioned Victor Strand's name, but Kit had heard the whispers. Her father had been asking questions about cargo that went missing before it reached the official manifests. Had been talking about going to the authorities. Had been stupid enough to think honesty mattered more than survival. Strand had killed him for it. Everyone knew. No one said a word. A cart pulled up to the warehouse below, and Kit focused on the present. 2 men got out, began unloading crates. She recognized one of them, a smuggler named Sykes, who worked the Limehouse route. She'd seen him before, marked him as someone in Strand's inner circle. Her mind catalogued the information automatically. Sykes, medium height, scarred face, walked with a limp. Connected to Strand. Useful to know. Across the courtyard, another man emerged from the warehouse. Younger, maybe 30, well-built. He supervised the unloading with the air of someone who expected to be obeyed. Another lieutenant. Kit had been watching Strand's operation long enough to understand its structure. Strand ran everything. But he had people who handled the daily business. Men who coordinated shipments, bribed officials, managed the smugglers who moved cargo through the city. Men who could be replaced if they failed. That was the key. Strand's operation was growing. Kit had seen it over the past months. More warehouses, more shipments, more people involved. Growth meant opportunity. Growth meant he needed new people, people who could move through London's streets unnoticed. People exactly like Kit. The thought had been forming for weeks, but she'd resisted it. Infiltrating Strand's organization was dangerous, possibly suicidal. One wrong move, and she'd end up in the Thames with her throat cut. But watching him now, watching his empire expand, Kit realized it might be the only way to get close enough to destroy him properly. 6 months after the funeral, Kit's mother stopped eating. Not all at once. Just gradually, picking at her food, claiming she wasn't hungry, giving her portion to Kit with the excuse that a growing girl needed it more. Kit knew what was happening. She wasn't stupid, but she was 15 and powerless and didn't know how to fight an enemy that lived inside her mother's head. Sarah Thorne had worked as a seamstress before marrying Kit's father. After his death, she took on more work, trying to make up for the lost income. But her hands shook now, and her stitches weren't as fine as they used to be. The shops that had once employed her started finding excuses, giving the work to other women. The money ran out slowly, then all at once. They sold the furniture first, then the clothes, then Sarah's wedding ring, the only thing of value they had left. It bought them another month's rent and not much else. Kit tried to help. She took washing jobs, scrubbed floors, ran errands. But she was young and unskilled, and the pennies she earned barely covered food. Her mother got thinner, paler. Her eyes developed a hollow, distant quality, like she was looking at something no one else could see. "I'm tired, Kit," she said one night. They were in bed together because they'd sold Kit's cot and couldn't afford fuel for heat. "So tired." "I know, Mum." Kit held her, felt the bones sharp beneath her skin. "But you have to keep going. For me." "I'm trying." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm trying so hard. But your father, I can't do this without him." "You can. You're stronger than you think." But she wasn't. Kit knew it even then, though she couldn't admit it. Her mother was breaking, piece by piece, and there was nothing Kit could do to stop it. When Sarah Thorne died, the doctor wrote "fever" on the certificate. It was cheaper than the truth. Kit's hands were shaking on the rooftop. She realized she'd been gripping the edge so hard her knuckles had gone white. She forced herself to breathe, to focus. The past was done. Her parents were dead. Rage wouldn't bring them back. But revenge was something she could actually accomplish. Below, Strand emerged from the warehouse again. He stood in the courtyard, surveying his operation with the satisfied air of a man who'd built something worth having. He spoke to the lieutenant, gestured at the crates, laughed at something Kit couldn't hear. He looked happy. Kit wanted to rip that happiness away from him, wanted to take everything he'd built and burn it to ash, wanted him to feel what she'd felt at 15, standing over her mother's grave with nothing but rage and grief and the awful certainty that the world didn't care. But wanting wasn't enough. She needed a plan. After her mother's death, Kit had two choices: the workhouse or the streets. She chose the streets. The first week nearly killed her. She didn't know how to steal properly, how to avoid the police, how to find safe places to sleep. She got caught twice trying to lift purses from Marks, got beaten once by a shopkeeper who saw her slip a roll into her pocket. She learned to fight back, learned to run faster, learned to recognize the look in men's eyes that meant danger, the tone of voice that meant violence. The brothel keepers found her in the second week. Two of them, smiling like they were doing her a favor. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be sleeping rough," one said. "We can offer you a bed, regular meals, work that pays." Kit knew what kind of work they meant. She'd seen the women who did it, dead-eyed and broken, selling pieces of themselves until there was nothing left. "Not interested," she said. "You'll change your mind when you're hungry enough." But she didn't. She stole food instead, sleeping in doorways and under bridges, learning the rhythms of the street. She got better at picking pockets, faster, more careful. She learned to read people, to know who carried money and who would chase her if they caught her. And she learned about Victor Strand. His name came up everywhere once she started listening. Dock workers mentioned him in whispers. Street girls warned each other about areas under his control. Even the police seemed to step carefully around his territory. Kit gathered information the way a miser hoarded coins, carefully, obsessively, never satisfied. Where Strand lived, who worked for him, what routes his smuggled goods took through the city. Every detail was another piece of armor against the helplessness that threatened to drown her. She couldn't touch him. Not yet. She was 15, alone, powerless. But she wouldn't always be. A year later, Nan found her, took her under her wing, taught her the skills that turned her from a desperate child into something more dangerous. 2 years after that, Kit had her first cache of money hidden, her first set of lockpicks, her first real network of contacts. 4 years after that, she could move through London like a ghost, taking what she needed, disappearing before anyone knew she'd been there. 6 years after that, she'd pulled her first girl out of a brothel, discovered that destroying small pieces of the system that had killed her family felt almost as good as bread when you were starving. 8 years after that, now, she was crouched on a rooftop, watching the man who'd destroyed her family, and finally seeing a way to make him pay. Strand needed smugglers, people who could move through the city unnoticed, who knew the streets and alleys, who could pick locks and create distractions and disappear when necessary. People exactly like Kit. She could offer her services, prove herself useful, work her way into his organization from the inside. And once she was close enough, once she understood how his empire worked, all the weak points and vulnerabilities, then she could destroy him. It would be dangerous. Strand was paranoid, violent, surrounded by men who wouldn't hesitate to kill her if they suspected betrayal. One mistake, and she'd end up dead in an alley, another nameless victim of London's underworld. But the alternative was waiting forever, watching from a distance, never getting close enough to matter. Kit had been patient for 8 years. She'd built her skills, gathered her information, survived long enough to have a chance. She was done waiting. Below, Strand finished his conversation and headed for a carriage waiting at the courtyard's edge. His lieutenant followed, carrying a ledger. They were probably heading to one of the other warehouses, or to a meeting with whoever he bribed to keep the operation running smoothly. Kit watched the carriage pull away, then stood slowly, working the stiffness out of her legs. She knew what she needed to do now. It would take time, a few more weeks of observation, of finding the right moment and the right approach. She'd need to prove herself useful without revealing too much, demonstrate her skills without making Strand suspicious. But she could do it. She'd been preparing for this her entire working life. Kit climbed down from the rooftop, dropping into the alley below with practiced ease. Her hand went to the locket beneath her dress, pressing it against her chest. "Soon," she whispered. "I'm coming for him soon." The fog was rolling in off the Thames, turning the docks into a maze of shadows and mist. Kit pulled her shawl tight and started walking, her mind already working through the plan. She'd need to approach one of Strand's lieutenants first, demonstrate her skills, make herself too useful to ignore. It would take careful planning, perfect timing, and a willingness to risk everything she'd built. But when she closed her eyes, she could still see her mother's face, hollow and distant, dying by inches because the man who'd killed her husband walked free and prosperous. She could still hear her father's laugh, cut short by rigging that accidentally failed. She could still feel the rage that had kept her alive through 8 years of surviving in a city that wanted her dead. That rage was a fire that wouldn't go out, couldn't go out. It was the only thing she had left of her family, the only inheritance they'd given her. And she would use it to burn Victor Strand's world to the ground. Kit walked through the fog-shrouded streets, her steps sure and steady, her hands already reaching for the future she'd been planning for 8 long years. The ghosts of her family walked beside her, silent and patient. They could wait a little longer. Soon, very soon, they would have their vengeance, and Kit Thorne would finally be able to rest.